Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Muhammad Fargal. In this lecture, I'll be talking about standards of textuality or criteria of textuality. This simply means what makes discourse or what makes a text a text. Why do we accept something as a text but reject something as a non-text, or we accept something as discourse and reject another as non-discourse? Back in 1978, Dubourg and Dressler talked about 7 standards of textuality. 2 of them stand out as more important than the others. These are coherence and cohesion. So I'll be starting talking about these 2 standards of textuality, then move on to the rest of them. Let me first start with a distinction between cohesion and coherence. Cohesion is a linguistic concept, something we find within the text. In other words, we can pinpoint cohesive ties within the text, and these cohesive ties are supposed to make the text stick together. That's why we call it cohesion. So cohesion is something that makes the text stick together. It connects the parts of the text together in different ways. We'll talk about the different types of cohesion later on. But for now, let's just say that cohesion is a linguistic phenomenon found within the text. And this contrasts with coherence. Coherence is a mental concept, a psychological kind of concept, and which is brought to the text by the recipient, whether the recipient is a reader or a listener. So here the receiver decides whether a text is coherent or not. So in order for something to be called discourse, it must make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then it would not be considered as discourse. But how would it make sense? The concept of coherence tells us that whether something makes sense or not, whether a text makes sense or not, has to do with the receiver. If, for example, the text talks over the head of the receiver, then that text would not make sense to that particular receiver. But if it is interpretable, if it is understandable to someone else, to another receiver, then that text would be coherent to him or her. This simply means that coherence is brought to the text by the receiver. It's not within the text. But we have to recognize the fact that cohesion does not cause coherence. Coherence may exist independently of cohesion. But in connected discourse, all right, cohesion is there. We cannot find, for example, a text, let's say, comprising 1 paragraph or 1 page or what have you, all right, that is devoid of cohesion. Why? Because the text has to stick together, and it is cohesion that makes it stick together. But it's possible to find text, short texts that are not cohesive, but still we can make sense of them. They are coherent, in other words. For example, John did not come to class this morning. It was raining heavily. Note that this text, mini text, is not cohesive, simply because we don't find cohesive ties between the first sentence and the second sentence, but we find it coherent. We figure it out in this way, that the heavy rain forbade him from, or prevented him from coming to class, or forbade him to come to class. So here we have a cause-result relation between the two sentences, despite the fact that this cause-result or cause-effect relation is not explicit. It is implicit. So it's a matter of coherence here. We can make this logical relation between the two sentences explicit by using a logical connector. For example, because or therefore. John did not come to class this morning because it was raining heavily. It was raining heavily. Therefore, John did not come to class this morning. Okay, now, as we can see, it's possible for coherence to exist independently of cohesion. But in long discourses, in connected discourse, it's impossible for coherence to be found independently of cohesion. Because, for example, an essay cannot be devoid of cohesion. Even a paragraph is supposed to feature cohesion. Okay, but cohesion does not cause coherence as such. That's why if something does not make sense, then it would not be coherent. So, for example, John did not come to class this morning. His mother was eating breakfast, or his mother was having breakfast. Okay, can we impose coherence on this kind of text? The answer is no, all right? So we cannot conceptualize something like that. Because his mother was having breakfast, he couldn't come to class this morning. All right, this is something that does not sound logical to us. So such a text would be considered incoherent to most of us. So coherence is something that's brought to the text by the receiver. That's why what's coherent to someone might be incoherent to someone else. For example, if you give